Clara hit the ground before her lungs could remember how to scream. Her hands found the cold mud of the barn floor and she pressed into it, fingers splayed, trying to anchor herself to something solid while the world kept tilting. Behind her, she heard Walter's boots. Slow, deliberate, the way a man walks when he knows there is nowhere for you to go. If this story shook something loose in you, subscribe, drop your hometown in the comments, and stay until the end. I want to know how far this reaches. The morning Clara Voss turned 22, she was already standing at the water pump in the gray Montana dawn, filling the bucket for the third time because the first two had gone to the horses. And the horses came before she did. That was the arrangement. Not one Walter had ever stated outright. It was simply the shape of the life he had built, and she had walked into it at 19, with a second-hand dress, and a mother who said Walter Voss had land, and that land was the same thing as a future. She had believed that once. That felt like a different woman now, someone she had read about. The Voss Ranch sat 11 miles outside of Harlan Creek, Montana territory. 11 miles was not an accident. Walter had explained it as practicality, proximity to the grazing water, the eastern pasture's good grass. She understood now it was architecture. A man like Walter needed walls he could not build with wood. She was back inside and at the stove when it started. Though what started it was nothing she had done. She had learned in 3 years of marriage that cause and effect did not apply to Walter's moods the way they applied to the rest of the world. She was at the stove, and the biscuits had come out pale on the bottom, and that was enough. You call that food? She did not turn around. They'll be fine once they cool. He was already crossing the room. She knew the count. 5 steps from the table to the stove, and she had memorized each one the way a person memorizes the distance to the door in a burning building. The first blow caught her across the shoulder and sent her into the iron stovepipe, and she went down sideways onto the floor. And the cold of it came up through her palms, and she held herself there, still, the way she had learned. The way stillness sometimes, not always, but sometimes, kept things from going further. Get up. She got up. He shoved her into the doorframe and told her if she couldn't manage a simple morning without making everything worse, she was going to find out what worse actually looked like. Then he took his hat off the peg, which meant he was leaving, which meant the immediate crisis had a ceiling. She listened to his boots on the porch steps, his horse, the sound of hooves on dry ground fading west toward Harlan Creek. Then she slid down the doorframe until she was sitting on the kitchen floor with her knees against her chest, and she gave herself 60 seconds. She had started this in the first year. 60 seconds to feel whatever was there. Because if she let it spread past 60, it became something she could not put back. She counted. She got up. She had been putting money away for 19 months. Not much. She was not in a position to put away much. But the Harlan Creek General Store was run by a woman named Mrs. Ida Falk, who was 68 years old, and had been watching this particular arithmetic for most of those 19 months. When Clara came in for flour or lamp oil, she would tell Mrs. Falk quietly that she believed she had miscounted. Would she mind giving back a few cents on the difference? And Mrs. Falk, without a word, would count the coins into Clara's palm, looking somewhere past her shoulder, and Clara would close her fingers around them and slip them into the seam she had opened in the lining of her winter coat. $61 and some cents. She had done the arithmetic so many times she could run it in her sleep. A stage ticket north to Billings was $4. From Billings she could find work. She could read. She could keep accounts. She had taught herself land measurement from Walter's surveying manuals because there was nothing else to read in the house, and her mind needed something to do with the hours. $61 only got you so far when you had no last name worth using, and a husband who was friendly with every sheriff in 2 counties, the way men with land and charm were always friendly with the law. She stirred the beans and tried not to think about it. She had gotten very good at not thinking about it. Walter came back in the early afternoon, which was wrong. She heard his horse before she saw him, and something in the sound told her, before the door opened, that the trip to town had gone badly. He came in without taking off his hat. That was the tell. Walter always removed his hat inside, not from courtesy, from habit, and what overrode habit was always the same thing. He looked at her across the kitchen with eyes that had gone very flat and quiet. Who have you been talking to? It was not a question. She felt her stomach drop. I don't know what you mean. Ida Falk mentioned you've been getting change back on your purchases. Said it had been going on a while. He tilted his head. Why would my wife need cash that I don't know about, Clara? It wasn't anything. I thought I was helping manage. He crossed the room in 4 steps. The table went over. She flinched back against the wall, arms coming up automatic, and he said her name in the register she feared most, the low one, the considered one, and she said, "Walter, please." But please had not meant anything in this house for a long time. She went through the door. Her body decided before her mind did. Some animal bone-deep thing that had been waiting 19 months for her feet to make this choice. And suddenly she was off the porch and running across the hard-packed yard in her house shoes, her heart slamming in her ears, and Walter was shouting behind her. And for one bright, insane second, she thought. His hand closed around her arm. He always moved faster than she calculated. That was the thing she could never factor in. He spun her and she went down on one knee in the dirt, and the grip on her arm did not release, and she looked up at him with the afternoon sun turning him into a dark shape against the sky. She thought, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, this is the one he doesn't pull back from. Rider on the road. She heard it before she saw it. One horse. Walking pace. Unhurried. Like the road belonged to him, the same as it belonged to everyone else. Walter stilled. She felt it the way his grip did not release, but his attention shifted the way a dog shifts when it hears something past the fence. The man on the horse was not moving fast. One hand resting easy on the reins, the brim of a worn hat cutting shadow across his face. He should have kept going. Roads went somewhere, and a man with somewhere to be generally got there, and whatever was happening in a stranger's yard was not his concern and had not been asked to be. But the horse slowed. Then it stopped. The man looked at Walter, standing in the yard, with his hand wrapped around his wife's arm and her on one knee in the dirt. He looked for a long moment, without saying anything. "Keep moving," Walter said, low, warning in every word. The man swung down from the horse in one easy motion. He looped his reins around the fence post at the road's edge with the same unhurried ease. Then he turned and looked at Walter again. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was flat and quiet, the particular flatness of someone who spent most of his time in places where noise was a liability. "I said keep moving. I heard you." The man's eyes moved to Clara. Just a flicker. Not pity. Not anger. Something more like recognition. The look of a man who has seen a specific thing before and knows exactly what it is. Then his eyes went back to Walter. "Seems like maybe the lady would like to stand up. This is my wife. My property. You have no business here." "No," the man agreed. "Easy as anything." "I don't." He stepped forward anyway. Walter's grip tightened, and Clara bit down on the sound it pulled from her. Walter said, "You take one more step, and I will put you in the ground." The man stopped. Not because the threat landed. She could see it didn't land. Not the way Walter expected things to land. He stopped because he was measuring something, running some interior calculation she could not follow. When he was done, he looked at Walter's hand on her arm, then at Walter's face. "Let her go," he said. 2 words. No decoration. No threat attached. Just the words, flat as stone. Walter laughed, short and ugly. "You got a death wish, friend? Let her go." Same tone, like he had all day. Walter's grip tightened. She felt the bones in her forearm grind and couldn't stop the sound this time. A short, involuntary gasp, and she saw the man's jaw set, the only movement in his face. Walter said, "Last chance to get back on your horse." The man said simply, "No." And everything happened very fast. Walter released her and lunged. She scrambled back on both hands and watched. Walter Voss was not a small man. He was broad through the chest, had 30 pounds on most men in 2 counties, and he moved in fights with the bullying confidence of someone who had never truly been stopped. The stranger didn't hesitate. He stepped inside the swing, close enough that the fist went wide past his shoulder, and got one hand on Walter's wrist and one on his collar, and used Walter's own momentum to put him into the fence post. Not with cruelty, not with particular force, just with the clean mechanical efficiency of a man who understood exactly how a body moved and where it gave way. Walter hit the post with a sound like a sack of feed dropped from a height and went to his knees in the dirt. The stranger stepped back. Walter knelt there, one hand pressed to his face, making a sound she had never heard from him before. Small. Stunned. The sound of a man meeting something he was not prepared for. The stranger turned toward her. His hat had stayed on through all of it. "Ma'am." He didn't move toward her. just stood 6 feet away, giving her room. You hurt? She looked at him. Probably 35, maybe older. Lean and weathered, with a jaw that looked like it had been hit before and hadn't particularly minded. Eyes steady enough to make her think of deep water. One hand resting loose at his side, near but not on the revolver at his hip, and his breathing was barely changed from what it had been before. My arm, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He nodded, like that was a reasonable thing to say. Can you stand? She tried. Her legs did not cooperate immediately. She got one foot under her, and then the other, and made it upright. She wobbled once, didn't fall. He watched her do it without moving to help, which was the right thing. She understood that immediately. If he had rushed toward her, she would have flinched back the same as she flinched from anyone. And he seemed to know that. Walter raised his head from the dirt. His eyes had gone flat and cold the way they went when he had passed through anger and arrived somewhere more deliberate. You don't know this county, Walter said. The stranger stood with his weight easy on both feet. I know enough. You don't know the sheriff. You don't know whose sons ride with the men I drink with. Walter lowered his hand from his face. There was blood at his lip, a small cut from the post. He touched it with 2 fingers and looked at his fingers. You put your hands on me on my own property. That's assault. Hanging offense in this territory. Hanging offense, the stranger repeated. The same way he repeated everything Walter said. Not mocking, just measuring. Turning it over and looking at what it was made of. That right. You ride out now. Maybe I forget this happened. Maybe I decide you were a traveler who didn't know better. He straightened his collar slowly. But stay one more minute and I start remembering things very differently. The stranger looked at Clara. She was standing 4 feet to his left, her right arm held slightly away from her body because it hurt to hold it any other way, watching Walter the way she always watched Walter in this particular register. Very still, tracking everything, he said, without looking away from her. You got a name, ma'am? She almost didn't answer. Giving a stranger her name felt like handing him something she couldn't take back. But there was something in the directness of the question, the ordinary plainness of it, like they were being introduced at a church social, that pulled the answer out before she decided to give it. Clara, she said. Clara Voss. Clara. He said her name once, like he was fixing it somewhere. I'm Nate Hadley, heading through to Miles City. I've got no quarrel with anyone in this county. He paused. But I'm not leaving you here like this. Walter made a short, contemptuous sound. You're not leaving her anywhere. She's my wife. That is legal. That is the law. I know what it is, Nate said. And something in his voice shifted. Something that made even Walter stop talking. I also know what her arm looks like right now. And I know a man who does what you've done in his own yard in plain daylight, does a great deal more than that behind a closed door. He looked at Walter directly. So you can talk to me about legal rights all afternoon. I've got time. The silence had weight. Walter looked at Clara. Not the way a husband looks at a wife. The way a man looks at property he is reassessing. Get in the house. She didn't move. It was the first time in 3 years she hadn't moved when he said that. Walter's voice dropped to the register he used when he wanted to remind her of what came after. Clara. Let her stand where she wants, Nate said. Quiet. Unhurried. A mountain doesn't raise its voice to make you understand it's a mountain. She is not a horse. She doesn't go where you point her. Walter took a step toward Nate. Nate didn't step back. They stood 6 feet apart in the afternoon heat, and Clara held her breath and watched Walter measure the man in front of him. Really measure him, the way he hadn't had time to before. The set of Nate's shoulders. The way his right hand stayed loose near his hip with the unconscious readiness of a man who had drawn from that holster enough times that the motion lived in muscle and not thought. She watched Walter's jaw tighten. Then, very slowly, release. Walter was a violent man. He was not a stupid one. This isn't over, Walter said. It is for today, Nate told him. Walter went to his horse. She had not expected that. She had always expected escalation. Her whole body was built for it now, built to receive it, and instead, Walter walked to the hitching post, untied his horse with stiff, controlled movements, and mounted without looking at her. He pointed the horse toward Harlan Creek. Then he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. He said to her, just to her, you think very carefully about what you're doing. Then he rode. She stood and watched him go until the dust settled. then stood a while longer because her legs had not yet gotten the message that the immediate crisis had passed. "He'll be at the saloon," Nate said beside her. Not a question. Until dark, probably. She turned and looked at him. His profile in the afternoon light was very still. He was watching the road, the same way she was, tracking the last of the dust. "And then he'll come back," she said. "And it will be worse, because you were here." He nodded. Not like that surprised him. Not like he thought she was wrong. "Is there anywhere you can go, between now and dark?" She thought about Mrs. Falk at the general store, who was kind and 68 and could not protect herself, let alone anyone else. She thought about the circuit preacher who had counseled her with great gentleness and appropriate scripture to practice patience. She thought about the deputy in Harlan Creek, a man named Burris, who had gone to school with Walter and still called him by his first name. "No," she said. Nate was quiet for a moment. How long has it been like this? The question surprised her. People didn't ask that. They asked in ways that were really asking something else, asking her to confirm it wasn't as bad as it looked, asking her to give them permission to look away. Nate asked like he just wanted the answer. 3 years, she said. Since about 4 months after we married. He let that sit without rushing to fill the space with noise. He'll say, "You set this up," Nate said finally. "That you flagged me down." "I know." She paused. "He's going to tell every man he drinks with that a stranger put him in the dirt on his own property. Those men are going to want to know who you are." Nate's expression didn't change, but something in his attention shifted. He was updating, reconsidering the timeline. How many men does he actually have? 3 he can count on quickly. She had thought about this. Roy Spence, who does what Walter tells him, because Walter holds his debt. 2 brothers named Cord, who are young and looking for a reason to prove themselves. There may be more, depending on how the story gets told tonight. Walter tells a good story. Nate set his gaze on the middle distance. "That changes the evening," he said. "Yes." "Is there somewhere you can go that he won't look for you tonight? Not somewhere he knows about?" She thought for a moment. There was an abandoned relay station, 3 miles north, used before the new stage route came through. Walter had ridden past it 100 times and had never given it a thought because there was nothing in it worth his attention. "Yes," she said. "I think so." "You said yes." He looked at her directly. "Not no." That's different. She hadn't meant him to notice. She had carried it so carefully. The $61, the 19 months of pennies, the seam she had opened and restitched 4 times in the coat lining. And in 2 sentences, this stranger had walked straight to the center of it. "I've been saving," she said before she had decided to say it. "It's been slow, but I have enough for the stage north. I don't have enough for what comes after." He didn't look surprised, didn't look pitying. He looked like she had confirmed something he had already suspected, and there was something almost relieving in that, being seen without being made smaller by the seeing. She made coffee. She didn't know why, except that her hands needed something ordinary to do, and it was an ordinary thing in an afternoon that had become so far from ordinary she couldn't find the edges of it. She went inside, and built up the fire, and put the coffee on, and she was aware the whole time that Nate Hadley was on her porch. She had told him to wait outside, and he had, without question, without taking it as an insult. She righted the overturned table. She swept the broken things. She stood at the stove and let herself feel how badly her arm hurt now that she wasn't running on fear anymore. It hurt very badly. When she came outside with 2 tin cups, Nate was sitting on the top porch step with his forearms on his knees, looking at the road. He shifted to give her room without making a fuss about it, which was the right thing, and she sat on the step with a person's width between them and held her cup in both hands. "You ride alone?" she asked. "Mostly. Working a job in Miles City. Cattle broker needs a man who can read contracts and ride. Both." She almost asked more. She had trained herself out of curiosity over 3 years of learning that questions were liabilities. She limited herself. "You've done something like this before." It wasn't a question. "Once or twice. Doesn't always go as clean." She looked at her arm. The bruising was coming up dark and clear under the skin, a record of where Walter's fingers had been. She saw Nate see it from the corner of her eye, saw his jaw work once, briefly, and then still. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me straight." He looked at her. "If I get on that stage, can he follow me legally? Can he make me come back?" Nate was quiet for a moment. Legally, a husband has recognized authority over his wife that the law supports in most territories. Yeah, he could file a claim, get a cooperative sheriff to recognize his rights. He paused. But that requires him knowing where you went, and it requires resources beyond his pride and whatever he drinks on credit. She thought about this. There are places, Nate said, where women have made new starts. I've seen it done. It's not easy. It's not without risk. He looked at her directly. But it's not impossible. Not impossible, she repeated. No. She drank her coffee. A hawk turned slow circles over the northern flat. He won't let me leave clean, she said. He knows about the money now. He'll watch every move I make. She stopped. Something had been trying to surface since the moment Walter rode away. He went to town, she said slowly. Yeah. He's going to talk. She turned to look at Nate fully. He is going to tell everyone he drinks with that a stranger put him in the dirt, and those men are going to want to find you. Nate's expression didn't change, but something in his attention shifted. The same subtle realignment she had seen on the road just before he moved on, Walter. He was updating the timeline. Walter doesn't need the sheriff, she said. Walter needs 4 men who owe him something and have had enough whiskey. And he'll have them before dark. How many can he get quickly? She calculated. Roy Spence, for certain. The Cord brothers. Possibly 2 more, depending on who he finds at the saloon and what story he tells them. Walter tells a very good story. Nate set his coffee cup on the step beside him. That changes tonight, he said. Yes. Then I can't leave you here. It wasn't a question or a request. Just a fact he was stating the way you state weather. You don't know me, she said, not objecting, just pointing to the truth of it. No. He picked up his hat and turned it once in his hands. But I know what 4 men and a grudge look like when they come down a road after dark. He looked at her. You know this land and these men. So you tell me, Clara, what are a woman's actual options on a Tuesday in Montana in 1883? The question landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Because that was it. That was always the thing. The question she had been building toward, with $61 and a coat lining and Mrs. Falk's careful hands counting coins into her palm. And nobody, not one person in 3 years, had asked her that directly and waited for her answer. She sat with it. The relay station, she said. It's a mile north, then west, past the old birch line. Walter fought with the man who owned it 2 years ago over a water claim, and he's never gone near that property since. It's abandoned. But it has 4 walls and a roof. Can you get there without going through town? Cross country. I know the way. What do you need to take? She thought of the coat lining. The $61. 19 months of careful and stubborn arithmetic. 10 minutes, she said. I need 10 minutes inside. You've got 8, he said. In case they talk faster than we're planning for. She stood up. He stood up with her, automatically. And she noticed it the way you notice something foreign, that your body recognizes anyway. A reflex of ordinary courtesy, so old and plain it landed on her like something from a different life. She went inside. 8 minutes. She moved through the house with the precision of a woman who had been packing this bag in her mind for 19 months. The coat lining opened with a quick seam rip, and the coins poured into the leather pouch she kept behind the flour tin. She rolled her second dress, her grandmother's brooch, the letter she had written to herself 6 months ago and never sent, a photograph of her younger sister taken before the family dispersed. She took the surveying manuals she had taught herself from, because she would need what was in them and they were hers in every way that mattered, even if the law said otherwise. She came out of the house, and Nate was at the top of the porch steps, and he looked at the bag she was carrying. The way she was carrying it, like it was lighter than it looked, like she had lifted it 10,000 times in her mind before this moment. And he said nothing about any of it. Ready? He said. Yes. They came off the porch together, and she was aware of the strangeness of walking beside a man who kept her pace, who didn't get ahead of her, who maintained the space between them, consistent and neutral. They were crossing the yard when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple. Coming from the direction of town. She stopped walking. Nate stopped beside her. How fast did he talk? Nate said quietly. Not alarmed. Assessing. Faster than we estimated. He turned to look at her, and she saw him make a decision in real time. Clean and quick. The calculation of a man who had been in corners before and knew how to measure them. "The relay station," he said. "Which direction exactly?" "North to the birch line, then west a quarter mile. There's a low stone wall still standing. Behind the wall is the old equipment shed. The shed door faces east, away from the road. How long on foot?" 20 minutes. On horseback? 6. He looked at the road where dust was rising. A half-mile out, coming fast. Then he looked at her bag. At her. "Can you ride?" "Yes." He was already moving to his horse. She was right behind him. They rode hard for the birch line. Clara had her arms around Nate's waist and her face turned sideways against the back of his shoulder, and she could feel through the fabric of his shirt the precise, controlled tension of a man managing a horse at full gallop while simultaneously listening behind them. She could feel it in the slight tilt of his head, the way his body stayed loose on the horse's movement, even while his attention divided between the ground ahead and the sound growing behind them. "How many?" she said against the wind. 3 horses. Maybe 4. "Roy Spence has a bay mare," she said. "Fast." "How fast?" She calculated the distances. "Faster than most." Nate said nothing, but she felt a small adjustment in his weight, and the horse lengthened its stride. And she tightened her arms and pressed her knees in and tried to make herself as compact as possible because she was a second person on this horse, and second persons cost speed, and she knew it, and so did he. The birch line came up on the left, and Nate took the turn west without slowing, and she leaned into it with him, and somewhere behind her she heard a shout, a man's voice too far to make words, but close enough to make intent. "They saw us turn," she said. "Yeah, the relay station." "You said the shed faces east?" "Yes. But there's a root cellar under the main floor of the relay house. Old, but deep. It has a second entrance on the north side. Underneath a broken grain cart, nobody moved when the station closed." "How far out of the way?" "Less than a minute." "Tell me where to go." She told him. He went. The relay station appeared as a low, dark shape against the fading sky, and the geometry of it was already in her body the way childhood geography lived in muscle and not memory. She had sheltered here once at 14 during a hailstorm, with her sister and 2 horses. She knew the lean of the land before her eyes confirmed it. "Here," she said. The main door was swollen in its frame, and Nate put his shoulder into it, and it gave with a sound she would rather not have made. They got the horse inside. He tied it fast. She was already moving to the center of the floor, feeling with her boot for the hatch ring she knew was there under a decade of old straw and grit. She found it. The ring was rusted and bit into her palm when she pulled, and the hatch was heavier than she expected and she couldn't. Nate was beside her. He got his hands under the ring with hers, and they pulled together, and the hatch came up with a groan that seemed to fill the whole building, and she flinched from the sound, and he said, quietly, "Go." She went down the ladder fast, her bag over her shoulder, and he came down after her and pulled the hatch shut above them. Absolute darkness. Their breathing. She stood very still and let her eyes find what they could. Nothing. Dark was dark. Then Nate's hand found her arm. Her uninjured arm. She noticed that. He had been tracking which arm was hurt this entire time. "Stay close," he said. "Tell me if I'm going wrong." They moved through the dark with her hand on his elbow, and she guided from memory and from the smell of old earth, and the way sound changed in the space. Twice she said left, and he went left. Once she said step down, and he stepped down. They came up against the far wall, and she exhaled something she had been holding since the hatch. Above them, through the earth, she heard hoofbeats arriving. Saddle leather creaking. Voices. Roy Spence's voice. She couldn't make the words, but she knew the rhythm of it. The particular cadence of a man who wanted very badly to have news to bring back to Walter Voss. Nate's hand was still on her arm. She realized she had grabbed his wrist at some point in the last 10 seconds. Not consciously. Her fingers had simply wrapped around it in the dark. She made herself loosen them. "Sorry," she breathed. "Don't be," he breathed back. Boots on the floor above. One person moving slow through the relay house, doing a sweep. She tracked them by sound, looking in corners, lifting a lantern in a slow circle, finding the horse. She grabbed Nate's arm. The horse. They had left his horse inside. She felt him go absolutely still beside her in a way that told her he had realized it at the same moment. Then from outside, Roy Spence's voice. "Anything?" The man in the relay house called back. "Horse in here. Saddled. Fresh." A beat of silence. Then Spence. "They're here." Everything above them erupted. She pressed her back against the earth wall and felt Nate step slightly in front of her, not fully in front, angled, positioning himself between her and the noise. She wanted to tell him she didn't need it. She didn't say anything because the truth was, it helped. It helped to have his shoulder at the edge of her vision. "North entrance," she said, right against his ear. Now. He found the rung above his head by feel and went up fast. She heard the hatch lift. Night air came down cool and clean, and she went up right behind him, and they came out into the north dark and pulled the hatch shut, and they were moving before she had fully gotten her bearings. Behind them, inside the relay house, she heard the main floor hatch being found. She heard it opening. She did not look back. "Where?" Nate said. "North fence," she said. "There's a gate. Past the gate, it's open country for 2 miles before the Miles City Road. We have no horse." "I know." She was already thinking. Open ground, no cover. 3 or 4 men on horseback who would come around the building any moment when they found the cellar had a second exit. "Roy Spence's younger cousin," she said suddenly. Nate glanced at her. "He'll be 18 at most." Roy would have put him on the least important position because Roy doesn't fully trust him yet. The north side. Watching the back approach because it's the farthest from where anything was expected to happen. "You want to get his horse. I want to get his horse." She felt Nate recalibrate beside her. "How? He doesn't know you as a threat. He knows me as Walter's wife, which means he knows me as someone who doesn't matter." She looked at Nate. "You stay back. I walk up alone. He won't know what to do with it. The moment he's off balance." "No," Nate said. "You're not walking up to a scared boy with a gun in the dark, alone. He won't hurt me. If he hurts Walter's wife, Walter kills him. You're betting your life on a teenager's judgment." "I'm betting on the fact that boys that age want to look like they know what they're doing more than they actually want to do anything." She held his gaze in the dark. "I know how to read men who want to look bigger than they are. I have had 3 years of practice." The silence lasted exactly long enough. 45 seconds, he said. "If it goes wrong, I'm coming in. Give me a minute. 50 seconds. I don't negotiate on this." Something almost absurd moved through her. Not quite a laugh. Not in this dark. Not with Roy Spence's voice still carrying from inside. But the shape of one. "Stay back," she said. She walked north. Roy's cousin was exactly where she had calculated. North side of the fence, sitting his horse with the uncomfortable stiffness of a young man performing vigilance. She came around the fence post and said his name the way she had heard it once at the saloon when Roy introduced him to someone, and he startled so hard his horse danced sideways. "Mrs. Voss," he began. "Thank God," she said, and she let herself look exactly as shaken as she was, which required no performance at all. "There's a man in the cellar. He came after me. I got out the back. I don't know which way he went. He was already off the horse. Young man reflex, older than his strategy. He came toward her, and she got her hand on the reins before he had fully registered what she had done. He went east," she said. "Through the north pasture." His head swung east, and she put her foot in the stirrup. "Hey," he turned back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I truly am." She wheeled the horse north and kicked, and it went. She heard him shout, heard him start running, heard him yell for Roy. She rode. Nate came out of the dark at a flat run and caught the saddle horn and got up behind her with a motion that should not have been as smooth as it was, and his arms came around her, and his hands found the reins with hers, and she let him take the steering because she was shaking. Properly shaking, the full-body kind that came after. "He'll be fine," she said, as if that was the most important thing. "I know," Nate said close to her ear. "You did good." They rode north. Roy Spence figured out the second hatch in less time than she had hoped. She heard them come around the north side of the relay house. 4 horses. And Walter's voice, somewhere in it now, low and carrying. And she said faster, even though Nate was already asking everything the horse had. "He's not going to stop," she said. "This doesn't end tonight. Walter doesn't let things go. He'll follow me to Miles City. He'll file with the sheriff there. He'll—" "Clara." Nate's voice in her ear, low and even. "One thing at a time. You don't understand the reach he has. I understand. One thing at a time. The road first." She pressed her mouth closed and focused on the dark ground ahead and let herself be anchored for a moment, because she needed it. She was 22 years old and had been holding the full weight of this alone for 3 years. For 5 minutes, she needed to let someone else help her hold it. They hit the Miles City Road. Nate turned the horse west, and she felt the quality of the ground change under them. Graded road instead of open flat, and the horse's stride evened out. She counted in her head. Estimated distances, the physics of tired horses versus a fresh one. 2 miles passed. The sound behind them didn't gain. 3 miles. "My arm really hurts," she said. It came out almost conversational. "I know. We'll stop when it's safe. I've got supplies in my saddlebag." She thought of the horse. "Still in the relay station, probably. We left your horse." He was quiet a moment. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't be." Same answer as before. She watched the dark road ahead. Miles City was still hours away, a city she had never been to. She thought about what $61 looked like in a place where no one knew her name or her husband's name. She thought about the photograph of her sister, about whether a letter would reach Colorado, where her sister had gone after their father's farm closed. She thought about the fact that she was on a horse with a stranger heading west in the dark, and the terrifying, disorienting truth of it was that this was the most agency she had exercised in 3 years. This flight was hers. This choice was hers. The root cellar had been hers. The reins had been hers. She was not a woman being rescued. She was a woman in motion. That distinction felt like something she needed to hold on to in whatever came next. 4 miles. The pursuit had dropped away far enough that she could no longer hear it. "The foreman job," she said. "You'll be late because of this." "I made a choice on that road," he said. "That's on me." She absorbed that carefully. Her understanding of how cause and effect worked in relation to other people's decisions had been thoroughly distorted over 3 years of being held responsible for Walter's choices, and Walter's moods, and Walter's consequences. She was going to need time to rebuild her calibration on that. "I don't want to be something that costs you," she said. "I know." A pause. "Right now you're something I chose," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him in the dark, his profile against the star-scattered sky, the easy way he held the reins. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough. That's what people say when they're making a decision on incomplete information." "Fair point," he said. "I'm making a decision on incomplete information." He was quiet a moment, and the road moved under them, and the night air was cold and clean and enormous. "And I've made worse ones with less," he said. She looked at the road ahead. Miles City came up as a scatter of lights against the dark, a city that was loud and strange, and that was, she realized as the first buildings appeared, something she had been saving toward for 19 months without ever letting herself picture it clearly. She was picturing it now. At the edge of town, they stopped at a way station. The woman who ran it was named Dorothea, compact and unhurried, somewhere between 50 and 70 in the way women who had worked hard their whole lives occupied an age range rather than a specific year. She came out with a lantern and looked at the two of them on one horse without particular surprise, which told Clara something about the kinds of things Dorothea had seen come down the Miles City road over the years. She let Dorothea wrap the arm. Nate sat across the small table, and she was aware of a cut on his knuckle she hadn't noticed before, probably from the fence post in her yard. "You should put something on that," she said. "It's fine. It needs cleaning, or it goes bad, and you need your hands." She held out her good hand toward Dorothea's supplies on the table without waiting for his answer. He put his hand out. She cleaned the cut, and he didn't make a sound. She was aware of the smallness of the gesture against the size of everything that had happened tonight, and aware also that it mattered, him letting her do something in return, keeping the exchange from being purely one-directional, which would have made her feel less like a person and more like a situation. "What do you tell people?" she said quietly while she worked. "When you stop like this." He was quiet for a moment. "I tell them the truth. That they need to get somewhere safe, and I can help them get there." He paused. "Dorothea's sent people north before. She knows how." She finished and pinned the bandage and released his hand. In the morning, she would find a lawyer. She would understand what $61 could do and what it couldn't. She would write a letter to her sister in Colorado that said, "I am somewhere new, and I am standing on my own feet, and there is more to tell, but I wanted you to know that first." She would build the next thing. Walter came to Miles City on the 5th day. She knew before she saw him. Some animal register that had calibrated to the frequency of his presence over 3 years. A tightening across her shoulders. A change in the quality of her attention. She was coming out of the land office on the main street, when she heard him behind her say her name. She turned around, because turning around was what she chose to do, not because his voice compelled her, because she decided. He looked smaller, not physically. Something in the quality of him had contracted. She could see it clearly now in a way she never could when she was inside it. The specific smallness of a man whose size had always depended on the smallness of the people around him. "You need to come home," he said. "No," she said. He blinked. The word landed on him differently than it ever had before. "Clara." "What you've done. Taking my property, running off, making a public—" "Walter," she said. His name once, like a fact. "I have spoken with an attorney. His name is Mr. Thomas Birch, and his office is one street that direction." She kept her voice level and her feet planted. "I have also learned 3 things since I arrived in this city that I did not know when I lived in your house. And those 3 things have a great deal to do with the water claim you filed last spring, and the 2 families who left their land along Harlan Creek in the last 4 years, and why they left it." She watched his face, watched the charm go out of it the way a lamp goes out when you turn the key, not gradually, all at once. "You don't know what you—" "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "I've known what I was doing since I was 14 years old, and my father handed me his farm ledgers because I had the clearest head in the family." She kept her eyes on his. "I was always going to be this person, Walter. You just required me to be smaller for a while." Walter looked at the street around her, the ordinary public daylight of it. Clara standing in the middle of Miles City's main street with her chin level and her hands still, and nowhere in her bearing the apologetic retreat he had always relied on. "This isn't finished," he said. Low, flat. "You're right," she said. "It isn't. But the part that involves me is." She turned and walked away from him, not running, not hurrying, at her own pace, down the main street of Miles City, Montana, in the summer of 1883, with her bag over her shoulder and her arms still wrapped and her boots on the hard-packed dirt of a city that was loud and strange and that she realized, beginning to like. Nate was leaning against the wall outside Mr. Birch's office. He had seen. She knew he had seen, because he was exactly where she had said she would be, and he had let it happen. Let her handle it. Let her be the person who stood on that street and said what needed to be said. "Well?" he said. "Well?" she said. He looked at her face, reading whatever was there. "You all right?" She took stock. Her arm ached. Her boots were dusty. She was 5 days into a life she did not yet have a map for. The map was being drawn as she walked on it, which was terrifying, and was also something else. Something that required a word she had not needed in 3 years. "Yes," she said. And she meant it. He straightened off the wall and held the door to the attorney's office open. She walked through it. A woman who had been made small by force had remembered finally how much space she actually took up, and she intended from here forward to take up every inch of it. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply refuse to shrink any smaller. Clara didn't escape because someone rescued her. She escaped because she had been quietly, stubbornly preparing for 19 months, 1 penny at a time. That kind of patience isn't weakness. It's a slow fire. And when the right moment finally came, she already had everything she needed. She just needed to remember she was allowed to use it. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of entertainment while carrying a genuine, heartfelt lesson about resilience and the quiet courage that lives inside all of us.